Here's part 1 expanded in simple, engaging language for around 750 words. On a crisp autumn morning in Manhattan, when the leaves were just starting to turn golden and the air had that perfect crispness to it, an extraordinary scene was about to unfold at the Grand Plaza Hotel. The towering glass and steel building stood proud against the city skyline, its revolving doors constantly spinning with wealthy guests dressed in designer suits and carrying expensive leather briefcases. Through these same doors walked a woman who would change everything. Though nobody knew it yet, she wasn't dressed any differently from the hotel's usual guests. Her navy blue business suit was perfectly tailored, her leather shoes gleamed with a fresh polish, and her simple pearl necklace spoke of quiet elegance. The only difference, the color of her skin. As she approached the marble-topped front desk, pulling her small carry-on suitcase behind her, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The front desk staff, who moments ago had been warmly greeting an elderly white couple, suddenly became intensely focused on their computer screens. One staff member even picked up a phone, pretending to be deep in conversation. After standing there for what felt like an eternity but was probably just 2 minutes, a young desk clerk finally looked up, his expression more suited for someone who had just bitten into a lemon than someone working at a luxury hotel. "Can I help you?" he asked, emphasizing each word as if speaking to someone who might not understand English. The woman smiled warmly, completely unfazed. "Yes, I have a reservation under Raja Technologies." She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had sat in countless boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals. The clerk's fingers moved lazily across his keyboard, his expression growing more skeptical with each click. "I'm not seeing anything under that name," he said, not even attempting to hide his smugness. "Are you sure you have the right hotel? There's a Holiday Inn just a few blocks down that might be more." He paused, searching for the right word. "Suitable." The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, but something closer to determination. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her platinum corporate card along with the email confirmation of her reservation. "I made this booking personally 3 weeks ago. Perhaps you could check again." The clerk's eyes widened slightly at the platinum card. These weren't handed out to just anyone. But instead of checking again, he picked up his phone. "Let me get my manager," he said, this time with a hint of uncertainty in his voice. While waiting, the woman glanced around the ornate lobby. She noticed other guests watching the scene unfold, some with embarrassment, others with discomfort, and a few with obvious interest. A young girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something, only to be quickly shushed. The clicking of expensive shoes on marble announced the arrival of the hotel manager. He was a tall man with graying temples and a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing his question to the clerk rather than the woman standing right in front of him. "This person claims to have a reservation," the clerk explained, emphasizing the word claims as if it were impossible. The woman maintained her composure, though anyone paying close attention might have noticed her grip tightening slightly on her handbag. She had faced situations like this before, maybe not quite this blatant, but similar enough. Each time, she had turned them into opportunities. This time would be no different. What happened next would not only transform this hotel, but spark a change that would ripple through the entire hospitality industry. But at that moment, standing in that lobby with all eyes on her, she was simply a successful businesswoman being judged not by her accomplishments, not by her intelligence, not even by the platinum card in her hand, but by the color of her skin. Little did they know, they weren't just discriminating against any successful businesswoman. They were about to learn a lesson about judging books by their covers, and it would be a lesson they'd never forget. "Would you like me to continue with part 2 of the story?" The hotel manager stood there, his artificial smile still plastered across his face, looking down at the documents she had presented. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and said in a tone dripping with fake politeness, "I see the issue here. While there appears to be a confirmation email, Our system shows no such reservation. Perhaps there was a technical glitch. The businesswoman had faced enough boardroom battles to recognize when someone was trying to outmaneuver her. She pulled out her phone, opened her banking app, and showed him the successful payment transaction for the room. As you can see, the payment was processed 3 weeks ago. I have a crucial meeting in 2 hours, and I selected this hotel specifically for its proximity to my client's office. The manager's smile tightened. Well, technical glitches do happen. Unfortunately, we're completely booked for the conference this week. I can recommend several other hotels in the area that might be more. He paused, choosing his words carefully, accommodating to your needs. A small crowd had gathered in the lobby now, trying to look busy with their phones while obviously watching the scene unfold. An elderly couple who had checked in just minutes before whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disapproval, though it wasn't clear whether their disapproval was directed at the hotel staff or the woman. The businesswoman took a deep breath. She built her tech empire from nothing, starting in her tiny apartment with just a laptop and a dream. She'd faced skeptics, doubters, and outright opposition at every step. This situation was just another reminder of why her success mattered, not just for her, but for everyone who would come after her. I understand, she said calmly, reaching for her phone again. In that case, I'd like to speak with your corporate office, and I'll need the names of everyone involved in this interaction for my records. She began typing notes into her phone, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. The manager's confident demeanor cracked slightly. He glanced nervously at the growing crowd of onlookers, then back at the woman's platinum card lying on the counter. Perhaps, he said, lowering his voice, I could check our system one more time. There might be something we can do. That won't be necessary, she replied, her voice clear and steady. I wouldn't want to stay where I'm not welcome. But I do want to understand your booking system better, especially its tendency to lose certain reservations. She emphasized the word certain just enough to make her point clear. The manager's face flushed red. Now, I want to be clear that we don't discriminate here at the Grand Plaza. We have all sorts of guests. All sorts, she interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Interesting choice of words. I'm sure your corporate office will find that fascinating too. She picked up her platinum card and slipped it back into her wallet. As she turned to leave, a young hotel employee who had been watching from behind the concierge desk hurried forward. Ma'am, she said quietly, I'm so sorry about this. I've seen this happen before, but I've been afraid to speak up. The businesswoman smiled warmly at the young employee and pulled out a business card. Thank you for your honesty. Please, take my card. I have a feeling there are going to be some changes around here soon, and I might need honest people like you. She walked out of the hotel with her head held high, pulling her suitcase behind her. The morning sun caught her pearl necklace, making it gleam. As she stepped into her waiting car, she was already making plans. The hotel manager and his staff thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. Because while they saw just another person they could discriminate against, they had actually just crossed paths with one of the most powerful tech entrepreneurs in the country. And she had already decided that this hotel would become more than just a place to stay. It would become a lesson in equality and justice that the entire industry would remember. Would you like me to continue with part 3 of the story? Later that evening, in her temporary suite at a competing luxury hotel across town, the businesswoman sat at her desk, her laptop open, and her mind focused. The day's business meeting had gone perfectly. She'd secured a major contract that would push her tech company even further ahead in the industry. But now she had a different mission on her mind. She picked up her phone and dialed her most trusted assistant. I need everything you can find on the Grand Plaza Hotel. Their history, their parent company, their financial records. Everything. Her fingers drummed thoughtfully on the polished desk as she listened to the response. Yes, I know it's already 9 p.m., she continued, a small smile playing on her lips. But think of it this way. We're not just digging up dirt. We're preparing to make history. She paused, listening again. Get the whole team on it. I want a complete report by morning." As she hung up, her phone immediately lit up with incoming messages. News of what had happened at the hotel had already started spreading through social media. Several other people had begun sharing their own similar experiences at the Grand Plaza. It wasn't just a one-time incident. It was a pattern. She opened her laptop and began her own research. The hotel's parent company, Luxury Stays International, was publicly traded. Their stock had been steadily declining over the past year, and their quarterly reports showed dropping occupancy rates. More interesting still, there were several buried news stories about discrimination complaints that had been quietly settled out of court. Around midnight, an email arrived from one of her investigators. The Grand Plaza's manager had a history of similar incidents at other hotels, but had always managed to move to a new position before facing any real consequences. The corporate culture at Luxury Stays International seemed to prioritize protecting their image over addressing these systemic issues. The businesswoman leaned back in her chair, taking a sip of her now cold coffee. She thought about the young hotel employee who had spoken up, about all the other people who had faced similar treatment but didn't have the power to fight back. Then she thought about her own journey, how she built her tech empire from nothing, how she promised herself she would use her success to create real change. She pulled up her investment portfolio on her laptop. Her company had been looking for new investment opportunities, and now an idea was forming. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about transformation. She could turn this humiliating experience into something powerful, something that could help prevent others from facing the same discrimination. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she drafted an email to her financial team. "Begin acquiring shares in Luxury Stays International," she wrote. "Do it quietly, through various subsidiaries. We don't want to attract attention yet." She detailed her strategy, laying out a plan that would take months, but would be worth the wait. As she finished the email, she walked to the window of her suite. The city lights twinkled below, and in the distance, she could see the Grand Plaza Hotel's distinctive silhouette against the night sky. Soon, that building would stand for something very different. Her phone buzzed again. More messages from people sharing their own stories of discrimination at various hotels. She read each one carefully, her determination growing stronger with each account. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about changing an entire industry's culture. She made one final call before heading to bed. "Schedule a meeting with our legal team for tomorrow morning," she told her assistant. "And contact that young employee who spoke up at the Grand Plaza. Tell her I'd like to hear more about what she's witnessed." As she prepared for bed, she smiled to herself. The hotel manager probably thought he'd won today, probably felt satisfied with himself for turning away someone he'd judged unworthy of his precious hotel. But in doing so, he'd set in motion events that would change everything. Sometimes, the biggest mistakes lead to the most important changes. Would you like me to continue with part 4 of the story? Over the next few weeks, the businesswoman's plan began taking shape like a perfectly orchestrated chess game. Her team worked quietly but efficiently, buying up shares of Luxury Stays International whenever they appeared on the market. The hotel chain's struggling stock price made it surprisingly affordable for someone with her resources. Meanwhile, she met with the young hotel employee who had spoken up that day. They sat in a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes, as the employee shared story after story of discrimination she'd witnessed at the Grand Plaza. Last month, they turned away a famous musician because they claimed his appearance didn't fit their standards. The employee explained, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "He was wearing a designer suit worth more than my yearly salary." The businesswoman listened intently, taking mental notes. Each story added another piece to the puzzle she was building. She had already hired a team of private investigators who were documenting everything, every turned-away guest, every lost reservation, every instance of discriminatory treatment. One morning, her financial advisor called with exciting news. "We've just crossed the 25% ownership threshold," he reported. "The company hasn't noticed yet because we've been buying through different channels, but we're now their largest shareholder." She smiled, remembering the manager's condescending smile from that day. "Keep going," she instructed. "I want controlling interest before their next shareholder meeting." She had already started drafting the changes she would implement: new training programs, revised policies, and a complete overhaul of the management structure. The investigation also revealed something interesting about the hotel's booking system. There was no such thing as a technical glitch that randomly lost reservations. Instead, certain staff members had been manually canceling bookings based on guests' names or photos from their linked social media profiles. The evidence was all there in the system logs. As her ownership stake grew, she began receiving invitations to corporate events and board meetings. She declined them all, not wanting to reveal her hand too soon. Let them think she was just another silent investor. The surprise would make the eventual takeover even more effective. She also started quietly reaching out to other hospitality industry professionals who shared her vision for change. She found hotel managers who had quit their jobs rather than enforce discriminatory policies, diversity consultants with proven track records, and successful hoteliers from minority backgrounds. She was building a dream team, preparing for the day she would remake the Grand Plaza in a new image. One evening, as she reviewed the latest purchase reports, her assistant rushed in with breaking news. A civil rights organization had just filed a class action lawsuit against Luxury Stays International, citing a pattern of discrimination across their properties. The company's stock price was falling even further. "Perfect timing," the businesswoman said, closing her laptop. The lawsuit would make her planned changes seem not just morally right but financially necessary. The board would have no choice but to support her reforms once she revealed her controlling interest. She thought about all the people who had been humiliated at that hotel, all the dreams and dignity crushed by prejudice masked as policy. Soon, the Grand Plaza would become a symbol of something very different, a place where everyone would be truly welcome, regardless of their appearance or background. Looking out her office window at the setting sun, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making things better. And she was about to make things much, much better. The next shareholders' meeting was just 2 weeks away. Soon, that smug hotel manager would learn exactly whom he had turned away that day. But more importantly, the entire hospitality industry was about to learn a powerful lesson about judgment, respect, and the true meaning of luxury service. Would you like me to continue with part 5 of the story? The morning of the shareholders' meeting dawned bright and clear. The businesswoman stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the same pearl necklace she'd worn that day at the hotel. Today, those pearls felt like armor. Her phone buzzed with a message. Her team had just purchased the final shares they needed. She now owned 51% of Luxury Stays International. The meeting was being held in the Grand Plaza's main conference room, the same hotel that had turned her away 3 months ago. As her car pulled up to the entrance, she noticed the same desk clerk was working. He didn't recognize her. His eyes simply slid past her to the luxury car she'd stepped out of. The conference room was packed with board members, executives, and major shareholders. The hotel manager stood near the entrance, greeting people with that same fake smile he'd worn months ago. When she walked in, he gave her the same dismissive look she'd received before, clearly assuming she was in the wrong room. She took her seat quietly at the back, watching as the current CEO began his presentation about the company's challenging quarter. He talked about dropping stock prices, the pending lawsuit, and their plans to weather the storm. The board members nodded along, seemingly accepting his weak explanations. Then came the time for shareholder questions. The businesswoman stood up, and every head in the room turned toward her. "I have some questions about the company's booking system," she said clearly, specifically about how certain reservations seem to get lost, depending on who's making them. The CEO's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" She walked to the front of the room, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "I'm your majority shareholder," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "As of this morning, I own 51% of this company." The room erupted in whispers. The hotel manager's face had gone pale as recognition finally dawned. The CEO gripped his podium tightly. "That's impossible," he stammered. "We would have known." She smiled and nodded to her team, who began distributing folders to everyone in the room. "Inside these folders, you'll find proof of my ownership stake, along with documented evidence of systematic discrimination across your properties. You'll also find my plan to transform this company." The board members flipped through the folders, their expressions changing from shock to concern. The documents showed everything. The manually canceled reservations, the internal emails discussing how to maintain their preferred clientele, the settled lawsuits. "3 months ago, I was turned away from this very hotel," she continued, looking directly at the now sweating manager. "But instead of filing a lawsuit, I decided to buy the company and fix the problem from the inside out." She laid out her plan: mandatory diversity training, new hiring practices, a complete overhaul of the reservation system, and most importantly, a new management team that would reflect the diversity of their guests. "We're not just going to change our policies," she declared. "We're going to change the entire culture of luxury hospitality." The room was silent when she finished. Then, slowly, people began to nod. Even some of the board members who had initially looked skeptical were now studying her proposal with interest. The numbers were clear. Their old way of doing business was costing them money. Her plan offered a path forward. The hotel manager slipped quietly out of the room, probably already updating his resume. The CEO looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but none of that mattered now. She had the power to make real change, and she was going to use it. Would you like me to continue with part 6 of the story? In the days following the shareholders' meeting, the business world was buzzing with the news. Headlines everywhere read, "Tech billionaire takes over luxury hotel chain after discrimination incident." The story spread like wildfire across social media, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination in the hospitality industry. The businesswoman wasted no time implementing changes. Her first act as majority owner was to call an emergency board meeting. She walked into the boardroom, now her boardroom, with a stack of papers and a clear vision. "Today," she announced, "we start fresh." The old CEO had resigned that morning, along with several board members who weren't comfortable with the new direction. The hotel manager who had turned her away had also cleaned out his office, though not before trying to delete several incriminating emails, which her tech team had already backed up. She brought in the young hotel employee who had spoken up that day, promoting her to head of guest relations. "Sometimes, the people who see the problems are the best ones to fix them," she explained to the remaining board members. The young woman's first task was to reach out to every guest who had filed a complaint over the past 5 years, offering not just an apology, but an invitation to return as VIP guests. The transformation of the Grand Plaza began immediately. Construction crews arrived to renovate the lobby, replacing the cold marble with warm, welcoming materials. The old-fashioned portraits of stern-faced hotel founders were replaced with vibrant artwork from diverse artists. Even the uniforms were redesigned to be more inclusive, accommodating different cultural and religious preferences. But the biggest changes weren't physical. The businesswoman brought in experts to conduct intensive training sessions for all staff members. "Luxury isn't about exclusion," she told them during the first session. "True luxury is about making everyone feel special." She personally interviewed candidates for key management positions, building a team that reflected the diversity of their global clientele. The new general manager was a brilliant hotelier who had worked his way up from washing dishes. The new head of marketing was a creative genius who had faced discrimination at her previous job. One day, while overseeing the changes, she overheard 2 bellhops talking. "You know what's different now," one said to the other. "For the first time, I'm proud to tell people where I work." She smiled to herself, knowing the changes were taking root. The press couldn't get enough of the story. Business magazines wanted to profile her, morning shows wanted to interview her, and hospitality schools asked her to speak to their students. But she turned down most requests, preferring to let the results speak for themselves. Instead, She focused on creating a new reservation system, one that was transparent and fair. Every cancellation now required documentation and review. Staff members were trained to greet every guest with the same level of respect and warmth, regardless of their appearance or background. One evening, as she walked through the newly renovated lobby, an elderly couple stopped her. "We were here that day," the woman said softly, "when they turned you away. We did nothing, and we felt ashamed ever since. But what you've done here, it's beautiful." The businesswoman thanked them, understanding that change happens not just through big gestures, but through countless small moments of recognition and understanding. The Grand Plaza was becoming more than just a hotel. It was becoming a symbol of what was possible when someone had the courage to stand up and make a difference. Would you like me to continue with part 7 of the story? 6 months into the transformation, the Grand Plaza had become unrecognizable, not just in its appearance, but in its spirit. The once stuffy atmosphere had been replaced with genuine warmth. Every morning, the lobby buzzed with a diverse mix of guests, from international business travelers to local families celebrating special occasions. The young employee, now the head of guest relations, had implemented a unique welcome program. Each guest received a personalized note in their room, and staff members were encouraged to share local recommendations based on guests' interests, not their appearance or status. "We're not just providing rooms," she would tell new employees during training. "We're creating memories." One morning, a famous fashion designer walked in wearing casual clothes, exactly the type of guest the old management might have judged. The front desk staff welcomed him warmly, not knowing who he was. Later that week, he announced he would host his next fashion show at the Grand Plaza, citing the hotel's new inclusive atmosphere as his reason. The businesswoman kept a close eye on the numbers too. Despite predictions from some board members that the changes would hurt profits, the opposite had happened. Bookings were up 40%, and guest satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Other hotels in the chain were reporting similar improvements as the new policies spread across the company. She started receiving letters from people around the world. A young entrepreneur wrote about how the story had given her courage to fight discrimination in her own industry. A hotel worker shared how he'd used the Grand Plaza's new policies to convince his managers to make changes. Each letter reminded her why the struggle had been worth it. The lawsuit that had been filed against the company was settled, with the businesswoman insisting on not just compensation for past guests, but also funding for hospitality industry scholarships for underprivileged students. "We're not just fixing the past," she explained to her team. "We're investing in a better future." One day, she noticed a family hesitating at the front desk. They seemed nervous, like they expected to be turned away. The father kept adjusting his tie, while his children stood extra straight. She watched as her staff welcomed them with genuine smiles, offered them fresh-baked cookies, and made the children giggle with funny stories about the hotel's resident cat. Later, she overheard the mother saying to her husband, "I was so worried they'd treat us differently, but this place feels like home." Those words meant more to her than any profit margin or industry award. The transformation hadn't been easy. Some longtime guests had complained about the changes, taking their business elsewhere. But for every guest who left, 5 new ones arrived, drawn by the hotel's reputation for genuine hospitality and respect for all. She established a mentorship program, partnering with local schools to provide internships and training for students interested in the hospitality industry. The program focused particularly on students from underserved communities who might never have considered a career in luxury hotels before. The old manager, who had turned her away that day, had recently opened a small bed and breakfast in another state. She sent him a letter, not to gloat, but to invite him to visit and see the changes. "Sometimes," she wrote, "our biggest mistakes can lead to the most important lessons." Would you like me to continue with part 8 of the story? The Grand Plaza's success story had started making waves throughout the hospitality industry. Other hotels began calling, wanting to know how they had achieved such remarkable results. The businesswoman decided to share their methods openly, believing that real change happens through collaboration, not competition. One sunny morning, she walked into the hotel to find a surprise. The staff had gathered in the lobby, along with many regular guests and local community members. They had organized a small celebration to mark 1 year since the transformation began. The young head of guest relations, who had first spoken up that fateful day, gave a touching speech. "A year ago, I was afraid to speak up when I saw something wrong," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Today, I help train other hotels on how to make their spaces welcoming for everyone. That's what real change looks like." There wasn't a dry eye in the lobby when she finished speaking. The businesswoman noticed something interesting during the celebration. A group of young hospitality students were touring the hotel as part of their training. They came from all backgrounds, and each one walked with confidence, knowing they belonged in this space. This was perhaps the most meaningful change of all, inspiring the next generation. That afternoon, she had an unexpected visitor. It was the elderly couple who had witnessed her rejection a year ago. They had brought their entire family to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary at the hotel. "We could have gone anywhere," the wife explained, "but we wanted to come here, where we learned that it's never too late to stand up for what's right." The hotel's success had caught the attention of industry leaders. The businesswoman was asked to give the keynote speech at the International Hospitality Conference. Instead of going alone, she brought her entire management team, letting each person share part of the story. Their presentation received a standing ovation. But the most touching moment came later that week. A young girl walked up to the front desk with her parents. She looked around the lobby in awe, taking in the diverse staff and guests. Then she turned to her mother and said, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to run a hotel just like this one." The businessman who had dismissed her a year ago had sent a response to her letter. His reply was unexpected. He admitted his mistakes and asked if he could visit the hotel to learn from their training program. She agreed, believing that personal growth deserves a chance. Local businesses started following the Grand Plaza's example. Restaurants, shops, and other hotels in the area began implementing similar training programs. The entire neighborhood was transforming into a model of inclusive luxury, proving that excellence and equality could go hand in hand. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing the latest guest satisfaction surveys, she found a comment that made her pause. A guest had written, "For the first time in my life, I didn't have to wonder if I would be welcome. I just felt at home." She pinned this comment on her office wall, a reminder of why she had started this journey. The press was still interested in the story, but now for different reasons. Instead of focusing on the discrimination incident, they wanted to know about the hotel's innovative training programs, its community outreach, and its record-breaking customer satisfaction scores. The Grand Plaza had become a case study in how doing the right thing could also be good for business. Would you like me to continue with the final part, Part 9, of the story? 2 years had passed since that fateful day when the businesswoman was turned away from the Grand Plaza. Now she stood in the same lobby, but everything was different. The hotel had become more than just a success story. It had become a movement. She walked through the bustling lobby, watching guests from all walks of life being welcomed with genuine warmth. A famous musician was checking in wearing casual clothes, while a family in traditional cultural dress enjoyed afternoon tea. Nobody raised an eyebrow. Nobody whispered. This was just a normal day at the Grand Plaza. The hotel had just won its third consecutive Best Luxury Hotel Award, but more importantly, it had received recognition from civil rights organizations for its groundbreaking inclusive practices. The training program they developed had been adopted by over 200 hotels worldwide, and their hiring practices were being taught in business schools. That morning, she had received news that made her smile. The small bed and breakfast owned by the former manager, who had turned her away, was struggling. Instead of celebrating his failure, she had her team reach out with an offer to help him transform his business. "Success means more when we lift others up," she told her staff. The young head of guest relations, who had first spoken up that day, had become a sought-after speaker at industry conferences. She had just finished writing a book about transforming workplace culture, and the advance orders were breaking records. "We're not just changing hotels," she would say in her talks, "we're changing minds." The businesswoman had established a foundation that provided scholarships to students from underrepresented communities who wanted to enter the hospitality industry. The first class of scholars was graduating next month, each one already having job offers from top hotels around the world. One afternoon, she overheard a conversation between two guests in the elevator. "You know what's special about this place?" one said to the other. "It's not just that they treat everyone equally. It's that they make everyone feel extraordinary." She couldn't have described her vision better herself. The hotel's success had sparked a revolution in the luxury industry. Other high-end brands, from fashion houses to restaurants, were following their lead, realizing that true luxury meant making everyone feel valued. The Grand Plaza had become a case study in how doing good could be good for business. As she prepared for a board meeting that afternoon, she looked at the framed email confirmation from her rejected reservation 2 years ago. She kept it on her office wall as a reminder. Below it hung photos of all the graduates from their training program, the scholarship recipients, and letters from guests whose lives had been touched by the hotel's transformation. The meeting wasn't about profits or expansion plans, though both were exceeding expectations. Instead, they were discussing how to help other hotels implement similar changes. The Grand Plaza had become a living example of how one moment of discrimination could be transformed into a lifetime of positive change. "Sometimes," she told her team, "the best revenge isn't getting even. It's making sure nobody else has to go through what you went through." And as she looked around at her diverse, talented team and the thriving hotel they had built together, she knew that this was the truest victory of all. The story of the Grand Plaza had become legend in the hospitality industry, not just for its dramatic takeover, but for proving that luxury and equality weren't just compatible, they were inseparable. And somewhere out there, another person facing discrimination might hear this story and realize that they too had the power to turn rejection into revolution.